episode 247. Welcome to Data Skeptic, a podcast about data science and fake news from an algorithmic perspective. Here's your host, Kyle Polich.
A few years ago, we did an episode called The Library Problem. It was a little different from our typical episode. No interview, no methodology. I was just running listeners through one sort of hypothetical interview question I used to give out. And what we learned from the surveys we run and the feedback we get online and stuff like that is that people really enjoyed that show. I mean, I'm sure not everyone did, but a large majority of you guys have requested more things like that. And by things like that, I mean sort of career-oriented, how to get a job kind of episodes. That's not what this podcast is or will ever be. We're a show about how data is changing our world. How you find the job that lets you be a part of that, well, that's slightly adjacent. Maybe one day we'll launch a sideshow for that. But once in a while, maybe I'll share a few thoughts, especially when there's an interesting data angle to it. So let's talk today about how you can get a job in data science or machine learning or as a data analyst or any of that hodgepodge of titles that one does professionally if you're implementing many of the things we discuss here on Data Skeptic. So if that doesn't interest you, actually, I'd say hang out for the next 30 seconds, because I can sum up my best advice, the best advice I think anybody has, pretty quickly. And it's take all the advice you can get with a grain of salt, including the advice I'm about to dispense. Be suspicious of everyone who gives out advice. Not that they're necessarily trying to mislead you, although many people are, but simply success and the ability to give good advice are not necessarily correlated activities. I'm reminded of a time I was sitting on a panel at a conference where we were discussing kind of vague career stuff, much like this episode, I guess. And when we got to the Q&A section, someone asked, how important are cover letters? And I'm really glad I didn't jump right in, because the guy who did jump right in, who was on the panel with me, went into a little diatribe about how they're the most important thing you can do, and you got to make sure you put your best foot forward and this kind of stuff. And I just kept quiet because my advice was going to be, don't worry about your cover letter. I don't think it matters at all. Certainly doesn't matter when I'm the hiring manager. So who's right, me or that guy? Well, it depends on who you're trying to work with. Here's my take on cover letters. And the background here is I'm saying this as a person who's been a hiring manager for the last, many years of my career. So I'm on the other side of the table now. And the general progression is you put a job posting live on some websites. There's tons and tons of these websites you can put it on. And then you wait and see what happens. And the first thing that's going to happen is just like the podcast download time series I was talking about last week, there's an immediate spike in applications. That trickles off and there's a long tail of it. Generally, at some point, then you cancel that listing, make a new one, so you're kind of tricking the algorithms to look more fresh, and that's a whole gamification side of this that a data scientist might work on if they were doing something with hiring. But anyway, the real point here, aside from the interesting statistics about applications and gamifying those systems, is that any hiring manager gets an immediate surge of different applications. A lot to go through. Now, depending on how good you or your colleagues are at putting that job listing up and, checking all the right check boxes and putting it on sites that do a good job with their search and things like that. And remember, everybody in this chain is playing a game. The sites that host job ads, they're trying to make money. And that's perfectly fine. Companies should be able to make a profit. And if they don't, they should fail. It's sort of evolutionary. And a lot of these platforms have different scams and schemes about how they're going to make their revenue and who their actual customer is. And you got to think about that kind of stuff. So there's always someone incentivized to lower the quality to increase the volume. And it's not even necessarily a nefarious thing. Maybe I want to see more people because I want to scrutinize a bit more, versus a busier person wants to see less and more highly targeted. Okay, well, how good those sites are with their targeting algorithms? I suppose that's a matter of opinion. But anyway, the hiring manager gets a big stack of applicants. Now, most likely they've come from a ton of different sources. Job sites, direct application, recruiters, and we're going to talk about recruiters in a bit. And not all of those platforms allow cover letters to come through. So for me personally, professionally, I guess, the call I made was that it was unacceptable to have a bias, that I should get cover letters from people who came from the blue site, no cover letters from people who came from the yellow site, because blue and yellow are both fine sites. One is a little bit more feature-rich. Applicants don't know that. I didn't put out anywhere that I prefer you apply on the yellow site or something like that. So we should have a level playing field. I'm going to look at your resume. I'm not going to look at the cover letter because I don't have the channel by which to require everyone to submit a cover letter. Now, be very careful with how you take this advice. If a hiring manager or a company says you must submit the cover letter, obviously do it. And there's no doubt it's going to help you out in certain situations, such as interviewing with the guy I was on this panel with. Now, the other reason I don't care much for cover letters is because you people, you do such a terrible, you embarrass yourselves with your cover letters. You really do. And I'm talking to the 99% of people that submit. It's literally that bad. Only the minority of the cover letters I have gotten are even professional, in my opinion. My absolute most favorite of all was, "Dear someone," and it wasn't my name, "thank you for the opportunity to apply at some company that I didn't represent. It's an honor to visit blah, blah, blah event and meet so-and-so from a second company, also not the one I'm working at." It was just this Mad Lib cut and paste. If anything, what I'm going to think from that is, oh, this is a copy and paste person. This is the sort of person that the only way they can get stuff done is copying stuff off Stack Overflow and not really understanding it. That's not a professional I want to work with. So if your cover letter is going to be addressed to the wrong person, yeah, definitely don't send that, although a large percentage of you do for some reason. Never kept the stats on it, but it should be zero, guys, obviously. And even then, the cover letters I did get, I don't think one ever really impressed me because they weren't even personalized. And why would they be personalized at, this sort of very early application phase? Everyone's out there applying to lots of jobs. There's nothing too personalized at that stage. Now, again, realize that advice, and we should move on because this isn't really my thesis here, just a side note, but I'm talking about applying for data scientist, data engineer, data analyst, these kinds of almost generic roles. If you're applying for the senior civically oriented data architect in, this government position, like there are a lot of very specific kind of roles, usually more senior roles, to be frank, but different industries and different levels of specificity of what you're applying for. If there's about 10 people applying, then yeah, that's cover letter territory. And I don't do a lot of that. Maybe I will later in my career. To date, I've been sort of more of a generic hirer. I hire smart people, and I don't always care if they know the tools I want them to use, because smart people learn tools very quickly. I'll teach you. So take that as you may, and let's talk about the conversion funnel now. And this is language you should learn. They don't teach this kind of stuff in school, but every business kind of looks at things in terms of a funnel, their customer base. Let's take something simple like a website that sells t-shirts. The first thing they've got to do is bring you in the door. Maybe they do that for advertisements, email campaigns, social media stuff, tons of ways. You got to track all of it. Get everybody in the funnel. First phase, click to the website. Okay, now they're at your website. Next step, maybe you either get them to, register an account or put something in a cart. Not everyone's going to do it. What percentage will? Track it. How do you improve it? Do an A/B test on the website. Expect to fail a lot, but find a few things that increase that percentage. Next step, from cart to checkout process. Not to completed order, no, because maybe your storefront sucks. What percentage of people seem to go through the let's conclude an order? And then another step, how many of them successfully put a credit card in that they want to run? Another step, how many of those actually convert? They go through, they don't get declined or whatever. Now you've got a customer, going to repeat rates. But let's stop here. And let's think for a moment how companies manage that process. At the front end, you're going to look and say, okay, we're buying traffic from 5 sources and we can follow those people through. Do any of them convert higher at one of those steps? Either from site visit to something in cart or from cart to purchase or things like that, and adjust accordingly. You're going to follow a similar funnel as you apply for jobs. The first step in my mind is you need to get a phone screening. And you could break down a bunch of steps before that, but there's lots of ways to get phone screenings. A phone screening is your first step. I'll talk more about that later, but let's get the steps laid out first. Now from there, every company is a little different. You might go from one phone screening to another, to another, to another, to another. You might jump right away into an on-site, but some number of phone screenings, some number of maybe other steps like a video chat or a little project. But through all those steps, what you really get to is an on-site interview. Go to the office, meet the people in person, expect to spend, more time there, maybe half or a full day. Some places might want you for a couple days, although that's a little rare unless you're getting into very specialized roles. So if you're a special person, yeah, expect that kind of thing. A lot of people, your first role, that would be rare. In person, generally you get one, different by company always, and then you get to an offer stage. So really, phone screening, in-person, offer. Know your numbers. How many companies did you apply to? How many of those converted to phone screenings? Of the phone screenings, how many converted to a next step? Of the phone screenings and whatever follow-up steps, how many converted to in-person offers? Offer meaning they said you could come in, whether you went or not. You should know these statistics and you should work on where do you need to fine-tune. If you're making a mistake, I don't know where it is. I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing it in one of the steps, maybe multiple steps. So know your statistics. Compare them with your friends even if you've got people who will be honest with you. So how do you get to that phone screening? Well, there's an infinite number of paths here. Go to a company's website and apply. Go to some job site and apply. In this part, people, it's brutal because it's the coldest. You'll hear nothing back. No one cares. I once applied to a company, didn't hear a peep from them. I applied again, ignored me again. I then talked to a recruiter who ended up getting me that job. So through the company's own negligence, they paid a huge fee to an outside person. So who's this person? Who am I talking about? Let's get into this role. Let's talk a little game theory here as well. Well, more decision theory than game theory. I didn't know about recruiters till I was really out into my career a couple of years. And I found most people just getting out of school don't know about them either, so let's explain the role. These people are like realtors. They try and connect sellers and buyers. Sellers being workers and buyers being companies. And just like a realtor, some of them will brand themselves in certain ways. I'm a specialist in this, or I know this area very well, or I'm highly connected in these parts, or I'm, part of some community and I bring more buyers and more interest via that community that I'm a leader in. And just like a realtor, some of that's legitimate, some of it isn't. That person will be paid a fee from the company for any candidate that's successfully hired. Now, obviously, you can negotiate any contract you want, and I'm sure there's many, many varieties, but these recruiters or headhunters or people like that, they get paid just like a realtor. They get zero unless the company makes the hire. So, in a way, that sounds really good. They're incentivized to make that transaction happen. So in some sense, if you're working with a recruiter, it might seem like they have your best interests in mind. They want a transaction to happen. You don't get a job offer, they don't get paid. You get a job offer and you don't accept it, they also don't get paid. Aha. So their reward, their payout, is conditional on your action. Oh, I really need to make an important point of clarification here. What I'm describing is generally referred to as an external recruiter. This is an independent party who does not work for your potential future employer. Their path in life is to make agreements with companies, usually a couple at a time, and they get this commission when they bring that company the candidate. They don't work for the company. They might work for an outside agency or they might be an independent person. There are also internal recruiters. These are people who do work for the companies. Their incentives are less interesting. They usually don't get a commission. Maybe they do, I don't know. But they're only representing that one company. They're just going to help you get the job or not. Their incentives are much more clear for you. So once they get you the offer, that person is incentivized completely for you to take it. Now, what might be in your best interest is to look further, see if other opportunities are available for you, opportunities that are somehow better. And better doesn't always mean more money. Better can mean a wide variety of things, and my recommendation is that the most you consider about better is better opportunity to learn and grow and network and build a foundation for your future. But that's obviously up to you. But put yourself in that agent's role. They have brought an offer to you. The minute you say yes, they get paid. If you hold out for more money and the deal goes south, or the company finds an alternative candidate, they don't get paid. If they go out and search for other opportunities that might be a good fit for you, they just jeopardize their own payday. There's no incentive to do that. So the recruiter is not your friend. Just like a realtor, they get paid some commission. But when you think about it, if a realtor does a really cutthroat sort of negotiation and saves you, 10% of the purchase price, that could be enormous for you. But they're getting a small percentage of that 10%. It might come down to, a few $100 or so, or even smaller for some cases. So the realtor doesn't have a good incentive for you to get the best possible price. They really just have an incentive for a transaction to take place. Shave a little off the top, well, you still got your payday. Recruiter has the same prospect of you. Now, that doesn't make them evil people or bad or anything like that. It just means you have to realize when the offer shows up, they no longer are incentivized to have your best interest in mind. On the other hand, the recruiter's quite good at getting you to the field goal. Sorry, is that a sports analogy? Does that one work? I'm not sure. Not really a sports guy. But certainly the recruiter's going to get you to that phone screening phase. That's really their job. Hand you off to the process that the company's going to have and stamp you or brand you with their presence so you're officially tagged as someone they're going to get paid if you get through. Now at this point, you might be in a long line of people being considered. After all, companies want to have lots of options. You need to stand out. And we could talk about ways to do that, But realize that at this point, that recruiter is kind of like your coach. He's going to make extra phone calls, follow up with the people. He's going to hear a little bit of back channel things from the inside of the company, from HR. Not necessarily like secret insider illegal stuff, just like, hey, we're talking to 10 different people. Now your recruiter has that information you didn't have, the size of the competition. Some other fact will slip out like, well, they're going to wait 3 weeks because they got to figure out X, Y, Z, and then they're going to make a decision on one of 3 people, and one of those is your candidate. They just get insider information like that. And that's to your benefit. And realize if you're applying and you're not going through a recruiter, that, hey, some of the people you're competing with have this advantage. What are you going to do to compensate? How will you follow up? However you do it, be professional and not annoying. You'd be surprised how many people get annoying at this phase. And I try to never consider that. Somebody tracked down my home phone number once, which they'd never been given, and called me at an inappropriate time because they wanted to follow up on the email they just sent 6 minutes earlier. And that's the kind of thing, me personally, I try and not let myself be biased by, because I don't know, I guess your enthusiasm is okay. Maybe it's just me, I'm culturally different. But am I subconsciously biased? Maybe. Are there people who it's not even subconscious, they just scratch your name out at that point? Sure, those people exist. So know who you're contacting and what the relationship is and what they're expecting from you, and ask in advance what the next steps are, these sorts of things. You may be talking to some hiring professional, someone in HR, recruiter, candidate placement, all types of titles like that exist. Those are people you shouldn't mind bothering. It's their job to make this process efficient. They deliver value to the company when they bring in good candidates and get them in efficiently and inexpensively and that sort of thing. Your collaborators in this regard. A good person in that role will even tell you very clearly when you're out, rather than drag things along as some companies will do. Now, if you're talking to more of the person who might be your supervisor or something like that, a colleague, be much more careful there. That's probably a busy person. It's not their job to do this administrative stuff that you might need them to do. It's probably someone else's job. Every company's different. Little startups and stuff, you see people wearing a lot of hats, especially managers. But it's a specialized skill to manage this process at any scale, and it's usually done by a professional who's trained in it, or at least learned on the job. Well, if you're not going in through a recruiter, what are the other paths? You know all the obvious ones, websites to apply on and stuff. And yes, you should do all those things. But you should think of it more like online dating. And forgive me, I'm just at the age, and I met Linda at just the right point where I never did any online dating. So maybe I shouldn't be drawing this analogy. But I hear a lot of friends talking about this kind of stuff, and a lot of people complaining about what's shallow, or, someone just sends you some quick poke kind of thing rather than doing any interactions. Linda and I have 2 good friends. We were at their wedding, and they met online. And one of the points that the wife, Christine, had said was, the husband, when he reached out, he actually personalized the message. Said something, nice about her profile besides just, sup or whatever. And that was how he stood out from all of the sup yos in the crowd. Most of the people, I think, doing that, I don't know, maybe some people want that sort of attention, but you're just spamming people, essentially. You're hitting up 100 or 1,000 people and just, hey, let's go fishing and see what comes back. And that must work for some people because they keep using those behaviors. If the behavior didn't work, wouldn't the agent drop it? It doesn't seem like an optimal strategy to me. But nonetheless, that's how a lot of people apply for jobs. Let me just hit every company out there. Let me bombard my resume. Let me send it 4 times. No personalization, no follow-up. Cast 1,000 seeds haphazardly to the wind and hope one of them takes root. And many people get jobs that way, I guess. So do a little bit of that, sure. But don't hope for much of it. No, go plant a seed somewhere. That's, I think, the real way to get into some place where you're going to be able to make a real difference. Take the time to research the company, or maybe if we're holding the analogy, research the person. What's that company up to? What are they interested in? Do they have people to give talks at meetups? Have they hosted meetups at their office? Have they had their staff featured on podcasts? Not just this one, SE Daily, Podcast.init, any of the other great shows out there. Learn as much about the inside as you can. But why are you doing that? I think most people then treat it like, oh, hey, I saw this video and I'm going to parrot out to you a few things about the company that I learned in 45 minutes. I mean, some of that's good, but you can tell from my tone I get annoyed by how some people are kind of trying to use it like a trick. It's like, great, you watched the video. You convinced me you watched it. You haven't convinced me you know what to do with the information. Focus on that. Think a step ahead of it. They said, oh, they have this problem. They think they're going to fix it by switching to Elasticsearch, and that's the next step. Well, make sure you know what Elasticsearch is. You want to ask them how it's going. That's cool. If you want to research the limits of Elasticsearch, if there are any, ask them how big their cluster is. Show a general interest in the things they're doing, and do it naturally. And by me emphasizing naturally, what I mean is, don't do this like a homework assignment. Oh, I've got to go learn what they're doing and study up on it. Like, follow a company that's genuinely interesting to you, where even if they don't want to talk to you, you're happy you walked away learning about some technology. So your first step is to get your phone screening. Your resume doesn't get you a job. It gets you on a call. Oh, we should talk about resumes too before it's over. But that first round call, find out as much as you can in advance. Who you're talking to. Is there an agenda? There's probably not going to be an agenda. At least Google the person, look at their LinkedIn, that kind of stuff. You may not get that information in advance, especially at smaller companies, or disorganized big ones, either way. So who are you talking to on the phone screening? First, is it a technical person or more of an HR person? Some people just do a first step where they ask you, when are you available? How much do you want? Where'd you go to school? This is a phase where often you'll be asked some stock questions by a person who has no idea what they're asking. In fact, try and listen to the way people ask questions. If someone says, can you describe a situation in which you would prefer random forest over logistic regression? That person has no idea what logistic regression is. And that's fine. Not everyone in the world needs to know about it. All of the cool ones will know about it. But what's going on here is that question was written for that person, and below it are some bullets. Those bullets might include phrases and words like ensemble, voting, decision boundaries, decision trees, nonlinearity. And all the person that you're talking to is listening for is, are they going to ding, 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 hit any of these keywords that advance you to the next round? Same with your resume. The resume gets you the call, not the job. And oftentimes it's going to be reviewed by a person who's just looking for some basic keyword stuff they were trained to look for. They may not appreciate the depth of your resume at that point. So make it clear and organized. That person has a difficult job. I think at my peak, I had to look at 93 resumes in one day once. So if I spent 1 minute on each, that's an hour and a half of my time. So you made one mistake, you got scratched off my list on my day of 91 applications. Send a PDF. Do not send a Word document. You have no idea how that's going to open on somebody's computer, especially on a Mac. Send a PDF. It's universal. Have a GitHub link. My gosh, I'm at the point now where I'm not sure if I'm going to look at resumes that don't have a GitHub link anymore. You should be exhibiting what you're capable of doing. That's just the modern economy now. Doesn't have to be some amazing thing, although if it is, that'll take you farther, obviously. Go work on amazing things. The best person to hire is an amazing person. Make sure you let your future employers know that that's you. But figure out your objective in the screening. Track your screenings. Take notes. What is your conversion rate from screening to follow-up? There's a lot to be said here about sending a follow-up email and that kind of stuff. I'll leave that to the general conversations people have online about how to interview and stuff like that. You don't need me for that. Frankly, you probably wouldn't want to do it the way I do it. I want to talk more about the mathematical and procedural points here. So if you have that sort of first round high-level filter, you ought to be able to get past those quickly. If you're not at like an 80% conversion on those, you need to re-examine yourself. Maybe you're applying for the wrong jobs, frankly, it could be one thing. So the first quote-unquote real phone screening you'll probably have is with someone from the team, maybe your future boss, a future collaborator. This person's there to technically screen you. And realize that a lot of these people are not going to be good at that. There's almost nowhere that trains people for how to interview. Really big companies will do that, but it's actually kind of rare. Most of the people you're going to talk to, they maybe got some folk wisdom from their lead or their mentor. Even if you get some sort of training, well, who made up the training? There's no good scholarship on the interview process, in my opinion, and how what steps you take to ensure you get good candidates. Everyone has their opinions and they're sure they're right that there's one way to do it. So you're going to see a wide variety of different situations here. When I interview at this stage, it's really pretty conversational. Mostly I just want to get you talking. The first question I ask is usually something like, refer to bullet 7 on your resume, go. Tell me about this A/B testing thing you built in Rust and why is it in Rust? For me, that's taking a measurement of the technicality of your language. I'm assessing how you're going to communicate and how I'm going to communicate with you. So just give me your best speech at that point. Maybe practice in a mirror. You're afraid of public speaking? Good luck finding a job. You got to go in and be a salesman. You got to walk the walk and talk the talk. Shout out to a former colleague of mine named Aaron. He said something really insightful. We had a candidate come in. I bet you Aaron's listening. Hey, Aaron. We had a candidate come in unbelievably nervous, sweated through an outfit, and could barely kind of get through the interview in a lot of ways. And at the end of the day, we all feel bad about that. And no one necessarily wants to dock that person for nervousness. That's all almost certainly going to go away. We understand people get nervous under pressure situations and stressful situations. But at the same time, we could only assess the person we talked to, who was so jittery they got through less questions than other applicants, didn't convey their ideas in a clear way, and they might have been brilliant, but we had to make a hard decision based on the performance, if you will, that they gave that day. That stinks. I don't want to lose a good person over being nervous, but I can only judge what you bring to the table. And he was exactly right. So if that's an issue for you, you got to get past that immediately. Full stop. So on these phone screenings and stuff like that, everybody's different. Some people like to give you puzzles and weird, brain teaser quizzes. I'm pretty unimpressed with that stuff myself. I don't think that that's a good way to measure the quality of an applicant. But every company's a little different. Everybody's got opinions. You just need to put your best foot forward. And remember that it's a two-way street. A lot of first-timers forget that. You're interviewing that company as much as they're interviewing you. Now, you may feel a great imbalance in that, and perhaps there is an imbalance there, but it's still a two-way street. So let's talk a little bit about your resume. One of the worst mistakes I see a lot of people make is putting things on their resume and not even really knowing what they are. If you are fresh out of school and your resume says you do support vector machines and you get on a call with me, I am always going to ask you about support vector machines every time, because it's a great litmus test. If you can't say something about margin, you can't tell me what the kernel trick is, then why is that on your resume? Take that off of there. You don't have to be a deep expert in every bullet point you put on, but I pick on people specifically around SVMs because most people don't know them well getting out of school. In truth, I didn't. I didn't really appreciate the SVM until later in my career, and frankly, I think that's just fine because there are some computational things about it that don't make it the most practical solution anymore. You're better off going with deep learning, almost certainly, no free lunch theorem aside. And I'm sure somewhere there's a machine learning professor that's face-palming right now saying, you cannot pass my class without knowing the SVM. And that's fine if that's your perspective, that's how you want to teach it. You shouldn't get an A if you don't know it, that's certainly my opinion. And most of you don't know it, to be perfectly frank. So take it off the resume, or better yet, go make sure you actually know what's on there. Be able to speak intelligently about it. After all, you're basically handing your interviewer a resume, like a menu. You're saying, here are the things you can order from my knowledge base. Pick one of these dishes and I'll serve it for you. If I say, tell me about your experience with ARIMA, you should be excited to talk time series with me. I once asked a candidate, tell me about your experience with ARIMA, to which I was responded, what's ARIMA? To which I responded, the fourth bullet on your resume under your project section. Oh, yeah, that didn't move forward. There's no reason you shouldn't be rehearsed. Treat your resume like a menu, and you need to give a performance. When someone asks about your project or your course on this, or what you know about differential equations, or what you know about algebraic circuit minimization, let's talk about those elusive lower bounds. Oh, and that's another thing. Typical rookie mistake. Hey, I took a bunch of classes. Here's a list of them. I'm ready to do anything, man. Just put me to work. I'll work hard. I'll do anything. That's great. I love the spirit, but you got to focus it. Very few people want to just pick up someone like that and see what happens. Pick something you actually want to work on. You want to work on machine learning in Spark. Great. Not you'll do anything. Machine learning in Spark. Oh, you want to work on ImageNet and transfer learning and stuff. Great. Go learn some TensorFlow, put up a little demo, or at least use some of those vision APIs that are out there to make a little project. Those couldn't be simpler to use, guys. Build something. Exhibit yourself. Tell me where you're headed, and if you're on my trajectory, let's attach. The other one I see is most people, when they get out of school, myself included, they are SQL illiterate. It's an embarrassing epidemic in this country. Yeah, I know most of you have taken a database class. You know that SQL is something about select, and then I guess there's from and maybe where, and I think you can say group by, but it's got to be in a certain order, and then there's having, and I don't really know what that does, and then there's something about partition by, and I don't really know what that does. Guys, you probably don't know SQL. I don't know, this is a common experience I had and I think many people have. You can learn the mechanics of it the way you can learn Latin, I guess. But you learn that stuff by being on a real database, not some fake toy your professor gave you. A messy, dirty, disgusting database with a bunch of errors in it, a bunch of unnecessary, confusing columns, a bunch of weird joins where the names of stuff have changed because the developers are constantly changing their minds and not keeping good standards and patterns. You got to get on that database and start answering real-world questions, and better yet, poking around. Because once you're really SQL literate, not every company has SQL, so if you're at some hip young startup and they're all Mongo or they're all DynamoDB, they're all Elasticsearch or whatever, learn it deeply and well. Whatever the tools are for data access, you must master them. That's step one. If you're on Excel, get off it immediately. Go learn pandas or go get into the tidyverse in R. You need to be fluent and direct with the data of your organization. From there, you can do anything. If you can answer people's questions, if you can get to the bottom of stuff, you can make a huge impact. Anywhere. And if you want to go straight into deep learning and work on the next iteration of BERT and you've been messing around with Elmo and all that cool stuff, great. You're on a different track, my friend. You've had a paper in NIPS or ICML. I'm not necessarily talking to you on this episode. You've got a whole different path to walk that I don't necessarily have all the advice for you on. If you've got that pedigree, I guess is the right word. But 90% of people are not in the top 10%. Tautologically, guys, come on. That's mostly who I'm talking to today. Most of you aren't going to do a lot of deep learning in the next couple years. You want to? Find a way to get yourself on the path. Anyway, I think I've rambled just about enough for today. As mentioned, we're not going to do a whole lot of this career stuff, but we've toyed with the idea one day maybe doing some sort of spin-off with a different host. The numbers really don't make sense on that, so I don't know that we ever will. But if you've got specific questions, do not DM them to me. Jump on Slack, though. General channel or maybe our jobs channel, something like that. Happy to chat. I always want to hear what people have to say on these topics. It's a shame that it's a very opaque process. When you get started in it, you really have no idea there's a lot of asymmetrical knowledge in the system. So I hope this may help some of you have a little more of a complete information game to play. We're winding this up. Interviewing is a numbers game. How long do you want to wait before you accept something? Or how long do you want to wait before you change strategies? There's a lot to be very clever about, and I think the root of cleverness here lies in tracking the statistics and knowing the decision theory angles on it. Where do everyone's incentives lie, and what information can you gain? If you can, pick the brains of any mentors you have, older friends who've gone through the process. Like I said, all advice should be taken with a grain of salt. You're going to have to carve your own path, but you'll get a lot further if you put yourself in the shoes of the people on the other side of the table. What are they looking for? Is it a good match for you? How do you make things frictionless for them? Anyway, tune in next week, guys. It is the kickoff to our new season. I'm so excited to announce our new theme and to start bringing you many of the excellent interviews we've already got in the bag. It's going to be an awesome 2019. I'll see everybody on the flip side.